Hello, everybody. It's me again at long last. I know a lot of you wondered what the hell was going on with me. And fortunately, nothing drastic. It's just cost of living crisis and sheer weight of work trying to keep up with, boring stuff, really. Just haven't had enough energy to do the vlogs. And also over the summer months, not a lot was happening. So I did try and get on top of all the other work. I just hope with December coming, I'll have a little bit more time to engage with you. But the reason I wanted to do the broadcast today is because of this eclipse we have, should we say the new moon on the 13th of November. 13th of November rings a bell because wasn't that the night of the Bataclan attacks and all that mayhem that went on in France, whatever that was. But the interesting thing is, the new moon in Scorpio, as you can see here, I've actually timed this chart for Tel Aviv in Israel because that's where all the kind of stuff is centered on right now. And as you can see, the chart works rather interestingly with Pluto on the ascendant right there and Uranus in Taurus, which we know is indicative of so much turmoil, disruption, upheaval and destruction, particularly in Taurus, like destruction of buildings and all that sort of thing, is on them. On the IC in Taurus. Also interesting because the very survival of the state, bearing in mind what I once said to you, as Kissinger said, there was only 10 years left of Israel, and no Israeli state has lasted more than 80 years in world history, and going right back to biblical times. So that's quite interesting as well for the disruption of the homeland. But why I mention this is, there we go. We've got the new moon, which happens at around 20 degrees. And 20 degrees, 43 minutes of Scorpio, conjunct Mars, which is 22 degrees of Scorpio, and they make a very tight opposition to Uranus. So it doesn't often happen that Mars in Scorpio manages to oppose Uranus in Taurus, crazily enough. But it's a lot of people are saying this is a very explosive combination. So I know that Joachim Phoenix was saying that he thought this is World War III. Now, that might be a slight exaggeration. But given these placements, it's interesting, particularly with Venus there in the sign of war, Libra, as well. So I looked and found something very interesting. So on the 14th of November 1940, when there was something similar, it wasn't a new moon, it was a full moon, but it was straddling this exact situation right here and opposing Uranus. So Uranus was about 21 degrees of Taurus, and this time there was a full moon. So sun was over here, moon was conjunct Uranus. Jupiter was at 8 degrees of Taurus, so that was quite similar too. That was the night Coventry was bombed. So I'm sure you guys will know the story. I think it was a time when they'd cracked the Enigma Code and they knew that there was going to be an attack on Coventry because they'd been listening into the Germans, but they had to kind of pretend they didn't know and sacrifice Coventry so it wouldn't kind of break the secrecy around that they'd cracked that code. So that was something interesting happening in the UK at a similar time as this whole scenario and the setup. And the same year, 1940, when Mars had by that stage moved to oppose Uranus, with Jupiter still in a similar position, there were bombings of Manchester and Liverpool. That was around the 23rd, 24th of December. So there's some scenarios that match this particular scenario, but we haven't had one particularly where there's the new moon conjunct Mars opposite Uranus like that. So that seems like this particular coming 13th could be pivotal. But because it's the new moon, it doesn't have to happen on the 13th. It could happen in the next 2 weeks. Will we see some sort of cataclysmic thing? Now, I don't know if you remember, but in the book that I wrote about world predictions, I did say it was all going to kick off in the Middle East. And that they'd have another go at Syria. I also said that the big theme was a sinking of a ship, like a Lusitania moment. And I notice now a load of people in the alternate media are saying that what with all these big aircraft carriers, the USS General Ford and a whole lot of others, there's a British one there too. Australia is sending one. It's not inconceivable that there could be some sort of false flag event where one of these ships sinks, gets hit, whatever, and then they use that as a pretext to say, that was Hezbollah, and they're backed by Iran, and now we've got to go at Iran. So I just think that's all quite interesting. Now, I have a little bit more to say on all these subjects, and we're going to make reference to some other interesting things that came up on Twitter. I just wanted to say, did you guys all see what happened in Acapulco? So about 10 days ago, I think it was on the Tuesday night, there was a category 5 or 4 storm out in the Pacific. Then all of a sudden it upgraded to a category 5, became a hurricane, and turned east and slammed right into Bonfil Beach in Acapulco, just to the south of Acapulco where the airport is. Now, if any of you guys follow Max Eigen, he's a key person in the movement, you'll know that's where his house is, and behind that is the secret garden where he does almost all of his podcasts for, and that's also the place where Jeff Berwick holds an Acapulco, which, as you know, is kind of an anarchist crypto festival for like open-minded people, blah blah blah. And Jeff's place in Acapulco was also damaged. Now, if you look at the videos, Dollar Vigilante, Jeff Berwick's channel, has got loads of videos. This was a serious event that took place in Acapulco. More serious than Maui. It's the biggest storm ever to hit a populace of over 1 million. Unprecedented. Acapulco does have earthquakes, but they've never had anything at this level. Now, as you guys know, Mexico's been fairly good on many of these issues because their president hasn't been going in the direction of the New World Order, so it seems. And Puerto Vallarta and some other places in Mexico have also been hit by hurricanes and storms and things, but the worst was Acapulco. Watching Jeff's recent video, and I usually do check in with his videos, so I know exactly the route he walks, his dog Lucy, and how the vegetation and everything looks crazy in Acapulco. There really is serious damage. This isn't a joke. This isn't one of these, oh, there was a hurricane, but nothing, it was a nothing burger. No, it's serious damage. The trees are ripped off. Now, I know it's going into autumn in Acapulco, but I wasn't aware that it could look this brown. It almost looks burnt. I mean, the trees are devastated. I guess the leaves blew off, but yeah, everything looks so dry and burnt. So I just don't get the feeling it's a natural event. So we've had Maui. We had Derna in Libya, where those 2 dams both burst at the same time and totally decimated a city. We had all those Turkish earthquakes, I think, earlier in the year. So it just goes to show you that when they decide a certain population is in the way of what they want, they'll just launch a weather bomb. Now, I know a lot of people look at Palestine and they don't have much sympathy, or they think this doesn't affect them, but we can all be Palestine, except it might not be bombs. It could be a weather event. Anything that they can do to advance their agenda and transform an area. Okay, so that's definitely what got me thinking about all that. So let's just have a look and see where we should go. Yeah, for you guys, I'll just give a bit of background in case anyone's listening in Aussie and America, to give you some contents. One of the big things I'm thinking about this Israeli-Palestine thing, it's not just about that area. It's almost igniting a powder keg of tensions in every country, because we have the strange situation in the West where the governments are incredibly pro-Israel. We've got the Israeli flags portrayed up on buildings like Downing Street, Sydney Opera House, Brandenburg Gate, all that kind of stuff. We have all these pro-Israel statements. We have certain leaders saying things like, oh, well, you know, you can't wave the Palestinian flag, or in France there's some law about you can't question Israel's right to exist, all this sort of thing. But the gist of it is the governments and the establishment are fully behind Israel, but we know that the populations are increasingly large populations of Muslims, and they feel very differently. So it just strikes me as a strange dynamic we've got on, a totally foreseeable dynamic where the government is heavily invested on one side in a way that's kind of blatantly partial. And maybe they should be a bit more neutral in things like this, try and bring the tensions down a little bit. And then the populace, not only the Muslim populace, but a lot of other groups as well, look at the level of violence and they think this is just not acceptable. So that's why I think, I used to think, well, Enoch Powell and his rivers of blood speech, it's a bit exaggerated, but you can almost see it going in that direction, can't you? Because these tensions are being stoked. Now, the interesting thing is, in the UK, Muslims predominantly vote for the Labour Party led by Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer, I think his wife is Israeli, his children are being brought up Jewish, so obviously he would lean in that direction, and he's been very vocal of his support for Israel. Plus, he went on a radio station saying that he thought the collective punishments of cutting water and electricity were justified. Now, as a former sort of QC and public prosecutor kind of person in the legal world, high up, he would definitely know that collective punishment is against international law, but he's sort of disregarding that. And I know a lot of people like George Galloway pointed this out. As a result, there's been a mass exodus of Muslims from the Labour Party, like local councillors, some MPs, and so much so, Muslim groups have founded their own political party and registered it. And this could cost Labour at least 30 seats in a general election. So it does sort of change the whole picture going into a general election. Add to that fans of Celtic, who are the kind of Catholic community of Glasgow, roughly speaking, very pro-Palestine, so I can't see them voting for Labour. So it is eroding Labour's base, and I don't see the Muslim vote going to Rishi Sunak, who is a Hindu and very pro-Israel. So you can see that it's really affecting the political sphere in an interesting way in terms of Labour. However, it's also affecting the right. This has caused a split in what the media would call the far right. Because on one side, we've got, say, for example, the Marine Le Pens, Gert Wilders, Tommy Robinson, possibly Katie Hopkins, but I haven't heard any recent broadcasts where she's opined on this, and other people in that category, right, who are incredibly pro-Israel and who are almost stoking up this Armistice Day thing, because we have a situation developing in London where there are regular pro-Palestine protests on the weekend, but these would clash with Armistice Day celebrations where there might be kind of more people with a nationalistic, patriotic feel, and that could get really complicated. And a lot of people are saying, just stay away. They could do a false flag. Please just stay away. They're stoking the violence. And then, of course, we've got other people on the right who are, I think Anne-Marie Waters is also on the side of Tommy Robinson and the pro-Israel. But we have David Vance as well, has gone that way. And then we have other people on the right. In America, I'd say the lead one is Stu Peters, who's going kind of towards Ye and Nick Fuentes kind of direction. But you can check out his Twitter to see that for yourself. So you've got him, Stu Peters, and a huge amount of other people on the right who are saying they're not necessarily pro-Palestine, but they anti-Israel and they're anti-violence and anti-the war, because they're carrying forward this mentality from Ukraine of, no, we are anti this kind of military escalation and we're going to say no. So we've got a split in Labour and a split on the right. Okay, so we've covered that. So just to talk about my own perspective is, in terms of war in general, I'm always against it, particularly because it always affects civilians. It never affects politicians. It never really affects the rich. It affects the most vulnerable in society. And in the case of Palestine, with a 50% population under 14, it's devastating to see the pictures. And, okay, I guess some of it could be war propaganda, the pictures coming out. But we do know about blockades, lack of medical equipment. It's a desperately bad situation there. So I'm totally against bombings, carpet bombings, indiscriminate bombings, war, and that per se. So that really troubles me about all of it. Cannot get behind it. Second thing is, I'm also against terrorism, but my research now shows me that most terrorism is problem, reaction, solution. It's most of the time it's kind of sponsored. It's not what it looks like on the surface. Then my other question is, my logical mind is saying to me sort of thing of, they constantly go on about what a terrible person Putin is, but I can't think of an example where Putin is bombing a civilian population to this extent. I really can't, but yet he's such a bad person. And then I know they talk about Israel being an apartheid state, which is true to a degree of separation of people. But there was absolutely no time in South Africa when, say, the population of Soweto were bombed for 23 days and with no end in sight. No medical going in, and no water, no electricity. So that wouldn't have been tolerated, would it? The other thing I'm struggling with is, I remember when the IRA bombed the town of Omar on a Saturday afternoon, and I think up to 22-ish people were killed, families, people with their grandchildren, a pregnant woman. It was absolutely atrocious. However, it was big in terms of Britain and the news right then, right? But I don't remember a Catholic community in Belfast being corralled in their suburbs, bombed for days, and deprived of any humanitarian aid or electricity, water and medical assistance. I just don't see that would have happened or been accepted by anyone. So I do feel there's this massive amount of double standards that I just can't get past. Next question is, I do feel we are in a slow motion economic collapse. Now, just because they're not reporting it doesn't mean it's not happening. It is happening. And as Gerald Celente, who's also one of the people kind of on the right-ish against the war, says, when all else fails, they take you to war. But isn't it been interesting for people who hadn't already sussed Jordan Peterson and RFK to see what was going on? Now, as you know, on my articles that I was writing for the David Vance site, I'd already called these people out and said, don't trust them. And now they've shown how kind of their lack of partiality. Now, I want to have a look at a couple of things because I have to ask myself, okay, let's say that this has happened. Hamas is a diabolical organization and Israel have to protect their citizens by undertaking these measures. I ask myself, are these measures working? Because I read that there are a number of millionaires in Gaza. I guess they are from Hamas. It was foreseeable when Hamas did this attack that Israel would strike back in this way. Are we really to believe they just hung around waiting to be hunted down? I think they're in Egypt. They could be in Pakistan. They could be in London. I don't think the head honchos are there waiting to be attacked. We also have this. It's from WikiLeaks, which I know you can't see. It was on Max's channel at the beginning of this particular broadcast, and it says here, from WikiLeaks, Israeli Defense Intelligence Chief Amos Yadlin in 2007. Israel would be happy if Hamas took over Gaza because the IDF could then deal with Gaza as a hostile state, going on to downplay significance of Iran in Gaza as long as they don't have a port. So there is kind of an interest in Hamas being there in terms of strategic importance when it comes to Israel. That just want to show you the huge difference here between deaths. The blue is children, this is Ukraine, and that's Palestine. And that's after what? But 1.5 years of Ukraine. This is after just half a month, really, in Palestine. Okay, let's have a look at this next. Hold on. We have this nonsense coming from politicians in France. Here we go. It was on my Twitter here. And this was, a new bill has been submitted in the French Senate. An insult committed against the state of Israel is punishable by 2 years of imprisonment and a fine of 75,000 euros. Seems excessive. Excessive. It's bloody ludicrous. But it's also going to anger people. France have a very large Muslim population. Don't you see they're trying to stoke things up? So it's not just about what's happening out there, whatever is happening. It's about things getting really stoked up in Europe. I just have a question as well. Maybe you guys can answer it. Now, I'm thinking there's exaggeration of wartime propaganda on both sides, right? I mean, hang gliders, seriously. There was something, I've got it on my Twitter. It was a cover of Time magazine from about 10 years ago. And they had a collage of all cartoon of all sorts of things going on. And one of the things was a cartoon that was depicting these hang gliders with Netanyahu and the leader of Hamas at the time coming in these hang gliders as part of the cartoon. So, I don't know if that's seeding or what it is, but I don't know much about hang gliding, but I think it's something that takes a place in the hills. I don't know if you can hang glide from a build-up area on a flat strip of land into the surrounding area. You just wonder about these things. On the other hand, when I see all the devastation in Gaza, I know that there was mayhem in 2006, then again in 2014. I'm asking, is there anything left there? So someone who knows the area better would have to tell me, because I do sometimes wonder how anyone is surviving there. And yet 2.3 people are living there. It seems inconceivable that anyone could be living there. I do also ask here, cui bono, and I know that there's a school of thought, I think it was even mentioned, I might come to a tweet about that, how it would be more convenient if everyone in Palestine went as a refugee to Ireland, I think was one of the countries mentioned. I suppose that would be great. Then we could get BlackRock in there to turn the whole place into a, smart city or something, like they're doing in Acapulco and Derna. That's something they like to do. Now, here we go. This was... Turkey is preparing to declare Israel a war criminal in connection with actions in the Gaza Strip. Erdogan noted that those who shed crocodile tears in the West for the victims of the conflict in Ukraine are totally silent watching the deaths of children in Gaza. This goes alongside a prediction of mine that Turkey was going to leave NATO, abandon the EU, get closer and closer to BRICS, and become a more key player in Arab/Muslim politics, aligning with Saudi and Iran in a way like never before. So that kind of plays into a prediction of mine. This is interesting. You'll know Infosis, the company of Rishi Sunak's in-laws, and here it's telling us that Infosis supplies the technology that Israel uses for the surveillance of Palestinians and has an Israeli entrepreneur, Yuri Levine, a former member of the IDF's Special Intelligence Unit 8200. Do go and look up that unit, you'll be interested, as a director. Rishi Sunak is conflicted, as is his wife, who owns a nearly 600 million share stake in Infosis. So I thought you guys might be interested in that. On the Labour side, someone said here in Fraser tweets, whatever happened to the ex-Israeli spy Asaf Kaplan, who Keir Starmer hired to co-manage Labour's social media in 2021. Kaplan had previously worked for the IDF Cyber Branch Unit 8200, which is accused of unethical surveillance of Palestinian civilians in the West Bank and Gaza. Don't you see, just like the previous health issue we were all going through in 2020 and 21, and with the injectables and all that, it's all these conflict of interests, right? Now, this is reported by Haret, and it said, anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. Netanyahu told his Likud party's Knesset members in March 2019, this is part of our strategy. So here you get the link. Remember I talked about, is terrorism state-controlled? And there you have an admission that Israel is funding Hamas for strategic purposes. Blah, blah, blah. Yes, terrorism is always funded, as none of these things really happen random out of ragtag groups of dissatisfied people. So it's important to bear that in mind when they talk about eradicating Hamas and blah, blah, blah. That's kind of not what's happening, is it? Yes, here we go. Nuking Gaza is an option. Population should go to Ireland or the deserts. Now, they always say, oh, Georgia Maloney's far right. And this one's far right, that one's far right. I mean, you can't get more far right, can you? But we won't hear much about that. And on a slightly different note, I've talked on this before, but this person sums it up. It's got a picture of Stephen Hawking. It says there, my favorite Masonic host of all time was convincing the dumb masses that the most intelligent man alive was a paraplegic man who apparently was controlling his voice by twitching his cheek and moving his glasses, and this was coding information into a computer that came out as a voice talking about the most high-powered scientific stuff that you can imagine. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And he wrote 10 books in the state, and he continued to lecture and travel the world, and they really will pull the wool over our eyes whenever they get a chance, won't they? So guys, I think that kind of sums up a lot of the things I wanted to touch on, given this unfolding disaster. And I pray for a ceasefire. However, I think they will continue to use this situation to stoke tensions against Iran, between the West and the Muslim world, between Muslims and others in the West, turning different factions of people who were waking up to the agenda against each other, because there are a lot of people who are awake or are now on different sides of this one. So everywhere you go with this, it's division, division, division. It's going to say, while I thoroughly support any protest against war or conflict or wanton destruction, I couldn't help notice that a lot of the Palestinian protests in London, everyone had an identical placard on a wooden stick. Very colourful, very neat, very well organised. And that rang warning bells, because I know when we were watching the freedom demonstrations against lockdown and against the injectables, people were different. People had made their own signs. People had unique placards. People had originally come, as they do in sports events, don't they, with their unique perspectives on their unique placards or flags. Everyone was kind of different, and there was a huge variety of people. However, those placards look like the kind of thing that gets mass rolled off at George Soros sponsored events. So, you wonder if they're playing both sides. They're controlling both sides here while appearing to, that there's a difference. So, as I say, I think the main thing that plays out in the rest of the country, the people who are at home, the vast majority of people, aren't out there, aren't protesting, aren't really getting involved, but it's sowing division among all of us. At the end of the day, the situation is serving multiple agendas. There will be numerous opportunities as this rolls on to crack down on free speech, and a lot of people who are protesting for free speech are now going to support it because they're on a different side now. But free speech is free speech. They're going to crack down on free speech. They're going to crack down on protests. They're going to create more division, and a huge amount more money is going to be laundered, like Ukraine, as a result of this. So as you can see, there are many agendas here being served as they reshape our world and our society.